So today we are going to talk about reincarnation again. As you probably remember, we've had 2 lessons on reincarnation already, quite a while ago now. So I am going to go summarize them quickly before we start this particular lesson. But this lesson is going to be all about the application of reincarnation in what we do. So let's start. Lovely. So lesson 34, reincarnation part 3, applications. The applications of reincarnation. So reincarnation part 3, who do you think you are? That is a bit of a strapline to our reincarnation lessons or project, you could say. And we're going to talk about the project, our reincarnation project today as well. And how it applies to network healers and how it applies to healthcare in general. That's our focus really with reincarnation. How can we use it to increase people's well-being at the end of the day? And, that's just a rebranding of spiritual evolution, really, helping people spiritually. But first of all, let's start with a summary. So, lesson 10 was the first lesson on reincarnation, and it was called The Basics. So let's just go over a few points quickly about what we did in lesson 10, because it was quite a long time ago. So first of all, we talked about anatomy, because reincarnation is biological. That's what we're saying here. It's part of our biology. It's part of our anatomy. So we talked about the soul being the energy body and the higher mind. That's the soul. And that's all made of magnetic energy or malleable magnetic energy, or as it is sometimes called, subtle energy, or chi or prana. We talked about the incarnation being the lower mind plus the material body. That's one incarnation. And the lower mind is also made of that type of magnetic energy, but it's an overlay to the material body, which is made of atoms and molecules. So a different type of energy. So that's the soul, and that's the one incarnation in anatomy. And we talked about how emotional memory and genetic memory is dragged through these many incarnations. So this is how it evolved originally, millions and millions of years ago, as a way of dragging or transferring emotional memory from incarnation to incarnation as a survival tactic, and also genetic memory as well. Genetic memory then widening the gene pool throughout a species without needing reproduction. So we introduced those concepts. So more specifically, genetic memory, we talked about how genetic memory is inserted into the mitochondrial DNA. So when a soul comes into an incarnation, it manipulates the mitochondrial DNA. It inserts some genetic information into the mitochondrial DNA. And we call that a high mind signature. Now, this is a natural process. It's not like it's necessarily doing it on purpose. It's how we have evolved, how life has evolved. And this is all not part of mainstream science, of course. This is our working theory. So every time a soul comes into an incarnation, it inserts a little bit of information into that mitochondrial DNA. And that mitochondrial DNA is only passed down the maternal line. This is another important point that we talked about, because this is central to our reincarnation project, which we're going to talk about a little bit in a minute. So mitochondrial DNA, this is well known. This is well known in science. So this is not our theory. This is fully accepted that mitochondrial DNA only gets passed down the maternal line. So mother to offspring. So a male does not pass on his mitochondrial DNA to his offspring. It's only the maternal line. Okay, very important that. And we talked about how mitochondrial DNA affects the gene expression of the nuclear DNA in the cell. Now, all that means is that the mitochondrial DNA can have an impact on how that body grows and how that body is regulated. So basically what we're saying is here that the high mind signature can have an influence on the regulation of that cell and therefore the growth and the regulation of the whole body. So just go over that bit again, because it's very important for what I'm going to talk about in a minute. Genetic memory is inserted into the mitochondrial DNA as a soul incarnates. That means that the higher mind signature has a record of the past incarnation, because it's DNA coming from the past incarnation being inserted into the current incarnation. Because that's the whole point. It's spreading genetics around. So the soul's past incarnation, a bit of that information is inserted into the current incarnation. So that soul signature has a record of its past incarnations in some form. It's very important, that. And the second bit, mitochondrial DNA is only passed down the maternal line. That means that everybody in their mitochondrial DNA, they have a record of the maternal line, but the soul signatures of their ancestors in the maternal line, because we inherit our mitochondrial DNA from our mother. So our mitochondrial DNA is coming from our mother. Therefore, anything that is in her mitochondrial DNA will be in yours as well. So her soul signature, or part of it, will be in your mitochondrial DNA, all the way up the maternal line. Is that okay? Is that clear enough so far? Right then, so carrying on in this summary from last time. Emotional memory, we talked about how karma emotion, which is emotional memory, is burnt in the karma emotion engine. And the chakras can regulate the emotions by sending signals from the chakras to the mitochondria in the limbic system in the brain. The limbic system in the brain is the emotional response center in the brain. So karma is burnt in the karma emotion engine, and the chakras send signals from it to the brain to start regulating emotions or to produce emotions. That's how emotions get produced from the karma emotion, or karma. And I've just said that the gene expression of the cells of the limbic system control the emotional activity. So reincarnation evolved as an emotional memory system and a genetic system as well. And we talked a little bit about the Reincarnation project, about the 7-phase research project to find evidence for all of this, because a lot of this, our theories about reincarnation, of course, is not part of science at all yet. So that's going to be one of our aims. Okay, so that was the first lesson of reincarnation. Now we're going to go, the important bits we're going to go through in a minute. Okay, so the second lesson. Here's a quick summary of the second reincarnation lesson, lesson 11. Spiritual evolution, this was based around. So this was moving out of the sort of scientific explanation of reincarnation and talking about the bigger purpose. What's reincarnation really about? How does it fit with the universal plan? And that's spiritual evolution. So we talked about the layers of the onion, which is referring to the layers of illusion or the layers of ignorance that we have to peel away before we get to the center. The center is our true self. The center is pure awareness. But we have growth. You know, you can consider spiritual evolution as spiritual growth, but you can also consider it the other way. Actually, you're removing layers. You're removing layers until you get to the center. And those layers are just layers of illusion, really. The illusion of the false self, the illusion of separation. And we get to the center, which is true self, unity, pure non-physical awareness. So we talked about that journey, and we used the analogy of an onion. We talked about the collective higher mind and how higher minds are all connected with mind energy. And it's like a higher mind grid or a higher mind network, a bit like a hive mind. How information and knowledge and resources are just passed between higher minds, constantly communicating in this network. We talked about the Kundalini growth and how Kundalini growth was actually connected to the layers of the onion, or the spiritual growth or spiritual development is connected to the actual growth of the Kundalini system. As the Kundalini system grows up through the major chakras, those are major milestones of emotional lesson learning, because the chakras are emotion regulators. So as the Kundalini system grows up through all the chakras, you go on this journey of emotional lesson learning. And that's what grows the Kundalini system. And then when it's ready to awaken, it awakens and you can go through self-realization. So we talked about all that. We talked about life plans and how once a higher mind goes from a sleeping higher mind to a woken up higher mind, then it starts building life plans. We talked a lot about what consists of a life plan. In a life plan, you know, the emotional lesson learning, the burning karma away, the not producing more karma, all that sort of stuff. And we talked about soul agreements and soul families. How when a soul has woken up, it starts to form soul families, it joins soul families, it makes agreements with other souls, agreements to meet up in certain lifetimes and do certain things and help each other along the way, basically. So that was lesson 2. So lesson 1 was more about the sort of science involved and understanding it at a logical level. And then lesson 2 was more about the bigger picture, spiritual evolution and self-realization. Okay, so moving on to applications. So the applications to all this, how can we use it, is basically what this lesson is about. And, you know, this course is about network healers. And therefore, the lesson is in this course. So how can we use this reincarnation as part of network healers? But also, network healers is part of healthcare. So how can we use reincarnation in healthcare, and how can we apply it in a network healers symbiosis? That's the question here. So let's start with healthcare. Well, to make it part of healthcare, we actually have to find evidence for it, of course. It has to become part of science. There's no other way. There's so much that we can benefit from the knowledge of reincarnation, but it has to be part of science. So this is where the Reincarnation Project comes in. So how do we go about proving reincarnation? Because if you think about it, the soul and all this, much of the stuff that we're talking about is way beyond current science. The subtle energy systems are not detectable yet by science. So we've got to go through all that process. And we may have the technology that exists to be able to do that, and we may not. But where we can actually start is by looking in the places where we can look with current technologies. We do have enough with current technologies to make a start. So we start looking for the higher mind signature in the mitochondrial DNA. That's where we've got to start, because we've got all the tools available. The advances in genetics have been, you know, quite good over the last few decades. So we can analyze mitochondria. We can analyze DNA. The whole human genome has been mapped already. So let's talk about our case study 1. And this involves people we know. This is a real family that we're talking about. Now, I'm not going to use names here because this is going out online. So I'm going to use initials, which makes it a little bit trickier, but I think we can get our head around it, I'm sure. So I'm going to talk you through a family tree now to explain what our plan could be. So this is the family tree. Now I've put on the different energy frameworks there, material body and higher mind, just to show you that there's more to a person than just the material body. And we're going to be trying to trace a higher mind in reincarnation through this process. So starting at the top, V, who is female, gets together with T, who is male. They have 2 children. On the left, you have N, who is female, and on the right, you have D, who is male. Okay. So, staying on the left-hand side for the minute of the family tree, N gets together with I, who is male, and they have 2 children called LA and C, and they are both female. Okay. Now going to the right side of the family tree, you have D, who is male, gets together with G, who is female, and they have a child called J. who is female. Okay, and just recently, over the last few years, J has got together with B, who is male. Don't forget, this is all real. This is a real family. So J has got together with B and had a child who is male called L. Right, hope that's clear enough so far. So what we can do to start with is develop a genetic test for a high mind signature using the maternal line. So if we can analyze the mitochondrial DNA from, let's go to the left side of the family first, because we've got 3 generations of female. So we have LA and C, who are both female. Their mitochondrial DNA has come from N, who is female, their mother. And her mitochondrial DNA has come from V, who is female, her mother. So we have 3 generations of females, and we can analyze their mitochondrial DNA and try and find the higher mind signature and try and find where it is in the mitochondrial DNA, and therefore hopefully develop a genetic test for finding where the higher mind signature is. Now that's that's as far as the theory goes so far. We've got to develop those methods, and maybe you guys intuition there maybe have something to do with more detail about when we go into this perhaps. But it's hopefully going to be possible to find the higher mind signature and know where it is, and therefore apply it to others. So that's the first part, develop a genetic test for the higher mind signature. Now, this project hinges on the fact that D has incarnated into L. Now, this happens very often in families, like a grandparent incarnating into the grandchild. This is very common, and it doesn't always happen, but it's common. And in this particular case, we are banking on the fact that D has incarnated into L. Now, we actually do know that this is the case through intuition, and we can talk to the higher mind in question here, and we know that it's happened, and it's the whole purpose that it's happened is for this reincarnation project. But you can't say that in science. Our theory is that D has incarnated into L. That's our running theory. Now, let me try and simplify this a little bit further. Take away the energy frameworks for a minute. And let's just go through it again, tracing the mitochondrial DNA. So V gets together with T and has offspring N and D. N is female, D is male. Now, N, so we're on the second line here, N, the mitochondrial DNA of N will be from V, because it gets passed down the maternal line. Now, I and N have 2 children, both female, LA and C. We're on the left-hand side here. Both LA and C, their mitochondrial DNA will be from N, because it gets passed down the maternal line. So we've been through this already. That's how we can hopefully develop a test for the higher mind signature. Now, as we know, or as we are theorizing, a soul comes into an incarnation and inserts a higher mind signature. So if D has incarnated into L, that higher mind would have inserted a higher mind signature into L. Now, the mitochondria L's mitochondria has come from J, because it gets transferred down the maternal line. And J, who is female, her mitochondrial DNA has come from G, because it gets transferred down the maternal line. Therefore, L should not have D's mitochondrial DNA, because D's mitochondrial DNA stops there, doesn't get passed down into his offspring. Okay. So D's mitochondrial DNA should not be in L. Therefore, if we find D's higher mind signature in L, and don't forget, hopefully by this time we have developed a genetic test for the higher mind signature, so we know where to look, Now, if we look in L, in his mitochondrial DNA, and if we find evidence of D's higher mind signature, then that would be evidence for reincarnation. And that's the whole premise of this project. Okay, any questions about that or any comments? Is that clear enough or not? Do you want me to go through it again? It is a tricky one. And the mitochondrial DNA is a loop of DNA. It's not like the nuclear DNA. It's a loop, and it's been mapped already. And there's lots of mutations which are not understood in the mitochondrial DNA. So yeah, okay. So I do have a kind of an idea. So yeah, it's going to be in some of those mutations that are unaccounted for. There is a high level of mutation rate in mitochondrial DNA, which is not currently understood. Yeah, so another thing to mention here is that the mitochondrial DNA also is not that big. And guess how many genes there are in the mitochondrial DNA? There are 37 genes in the mitochondrial DNA. And just as an aside, which is not really connected, but D, who has passed away, obviously, because we think he's reincarnated into L, D passed away at the age of 37, which is how many genes there are in the mitochondrial DNA. But anyway, that's just a little sign to show us something. But anyway, the point I was trying to make was that it's not a very big loop of DNA, and therefore we think that it probably maybe holds a number of higher mind signatures, but then they must get worn. They either must get worn away or they must get deleted somehow. It can't have a complete record of the soul signatures in it. But you can also get genetic influences from past incarnations. Now, quite a lot of the research in reincarnation actually does show that. So if you go and look at the research at the University of Virginia in the US, they've actually found instances where children have reincarnational memories. They've gone back and corroborated those memories, but they've also seen that there are genetic similarities. And also, interestingly, sometimes they have certain marks on them which correspond to the way in which they died in their previous incarnation. So there's definitely some sort of impact through genetics. So let's look at the Reincarnation Project as a whole. So this Reincarnation Project really is bigger than just proving reincarnation, to be honest with you. The question is, who do you think you are? Who do you think you are as a human being? Who does the human think that they are? So there's 7 phases of this Reincarnation Project, and these phases might not be completely one after the other. They may overlap, to be honest with you, and they may even be running consecutively. But we've separated out certain phases that need to happen independently almost. And I should have mentioned there are currently 23 projects within the Reincarnation Project. So the Reincarnation Project is an umbrella term, really, for a whole host of projects that need to happen. And this, as you can imagine, is a huge undertaking, and it may take 15 to 20 years or more, who knows? So this is not a quick thing, obviously. Each project is substantial on its own. But in this lesson, I'm just going to summarize it very quickly. I'm not going to go through them all. I'm just going to go through each phase. So phase 1 is the exploratory phase. This is where we have to do literature reviews and just research online, basically. So this is a gathering information phase, really. And so we have to look at all the existing research which has been done on reincarnation so far. And then we build on top of that. We make sure we don't do anything that's already been done before. And we have to analyze the impact of any possible findings on culture and religion, because these are massive impact. So we want to know ourselves what sort of impact that it's going to have. And the possible impacts on healthcare. This is our main focus, to be honest with you. This is why we're doing it. It's all about healthcare. So that's phase 1, lots of researching. Then phase 2 is called detections. So this is a tricky bit because we don't know how we're going to do this yet. but we have to develop methods to detect the weak magnetic fields that are part of the bioenergy layer of the human body. So, for example, the lower mind, the energy body, and the higher mind. We actually have to find ways of detecting them. Now, don't forget that we've started with the Reincarnation project in terms of the family tree and the genetics. So we've hopefully by now got some results, and this is all then following on from that. Now, this particular phase is overlapping with the Free Flow project, isn't it? If you think about it, the Free Flow project is energy healing, but part of the energy healing project is to actually detect how these things happen. How does energy healing work? That means detecting the energy body, the chakras, and the free flow system, and all that sort of stuff. So this has a massive overlap with the free flow project. So phase 3 is all about processes. So once you've detected or found a way of detecting the energy body and the energy frameworks, then we need to understand the actual processes involved. So we need to look deep inside the cells of the material body and understand how information gets transferred from the higher mind through all the different energy frameworks and into mitochondrial DNA. So we have to open up cells and look in cells and detect what's going on here. This will all probably sit in the field of quantum biology. Quantum biology is a relatively new field in biology which analyzes the very small, the quantum level of things going on in biology. And they found that they have found that there is a whole new world opening up that has not been seen before. That biology doesn't just stop at the cellular level or the atomic level. It goes even further. It goes to the quantum level as well. And there's quantum effects happening all the way around our body. So next is phase 4, which is a genetic testing program. So this is going back to the prototype, you could say, of the family tree and the genetic testing. And this is where you can apply it. We can apply that to other family trees, basically, because this is how science works. You produce an experiment and get some results, but it has to be reproducible. Other people need to be able to reproduce it elsewhere. We have to show that it happens all over the place. So just going back to our initial project there. So we develop a genetic test for the higher mind signature using the maternal line. And then we can test both departing and new generations for that same signature. And we can do that in many different families, hopefully. Yeah, so, well, for our initial project, I think D, we do have genetic material from D, because as it happens, V kept some genetic material from D. So it is possible that we can extract that mitochondrial DNA. And then in others, obviously, it has to be pre-planned. So we have to approach people and say, do you want to be part of a reincarnation project? And do it that way, basically. And then phase 5 is tracing programs. So this is taking it a step even further, of course, and this is taking it into the future. We don't know how exactly we're going to do some of these things because we need to detect the energy body first, don't we? But then we can actually develop a tag. We need to develop a magnetic tag for the energy body. And I've got some ideas. I feel that in the lower back area, there is a space on the skin of the energy body for some reason that is conducive to magnetizing it in some way, which then it stays magnetized and then you can detect that magnetic tag at some point. So this would allow us to actually trace a soul from departing in incarnation through its journey and into another next generation, a new incarnation, basically. So that would be the absolute ideal of proving reincarnation, tracing the soul from one place to another, of course. And we can do this in human studies. We can also do it in non-invasive animal studies as well. If we have a zoo or wildlife park, for example, has a family or a society of meerkats or something like that, just as an example, because something with a short lifespan will be a shorter lifespan than a human will be easier to test on, and a family or societal group of animals definitely tend to reincarnate in that same group. So that would be useful. But having said that, we do have a program ourselves that we could actually use. Ayashanta, of course. We have an end-of-life care department, which I'm going to talk about more at the end of this lesson. But we could have an opt-in option for people in Ayashanta if they want to become part of our reincarnation project. So that's phase 5, tracing programs. Okay, so phase 6 is called Who Do You Think You Are? Now, this is where we start moving on from reincarnation a little bit and start asking the questions of who do you think you are? Who are we? What are we? Where do we come from? These are the questions that science needs to ask, because science doesn't ask those type of questions yet. But once science understands reincarnation, then those questions can start to be asked and we can go even further. For example, are we this current personality? Because currently, as far as science knows, we are just the material body and mind. Therefore, we're just this current personality. But then, with the knowledge of reincarnation, people will start asking, well, who am I then? Am I this personality? Am I the previous one? Are we previous karmic personalities? Or are we something even deeper? So this is where we can push the project further and actually try and find evidence for pure awareness. Now, this is going way into the future, of course, because the higher mind and the awareness filter is at such a high level of frequency of vibration that's a whole different ballgame of trying to detect. But it is in the future. At some point, this will be possible. Are we pure awareness? And then we can ask, are we universal awareness? I think all of this can be part of science. And this is where science and spirituality just blend together into one at some point. So, of course, now we're talking about universal theory, or the universal trinity diagram that we've talked about quite a lot already. Now, I'm calling it universal theory in this lesson because it's a better name. It's a better name if we're trying to find evidence for it in science. So just as a reminder, that is the diagram that I'm talking about here. This is how the universe works. And this is what shows how it is a conscious universe, an aware universe, and how that awareness is your awareness. It's the same awareness in everybody. The one awareness, unity. So this is how we can try and bring in these spiritual concepts into science. Now, that's an impossibility at the moment, but through a step-by-step process, this will happen eventually until science and spirituality are one, really. And just imagine when that is brought into healthcare. Just imagine when the meaning of life, the purpose of life, the purpose of the universe is part of human healthcare and welfare systems. Well, that changes everything, doesn't it? That accelerates spiritual evolution because everybody's doing it and everybody knows that is the goal. Everybody knows what they need to do. That's part of the global awakening. That's why everything quickens up through the global awakening, because all this has been blind to science for hundreds of years. So that's phase 6. Who do you think you are? Now, phase 7 is the application side of things. So this is where we're using the results of these experiments and applying them. We apply them in network healers. So we're already using these concepts in network healers. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But as we get research results, then we can integrate that into network healers and how we work. And hopefully a revolution in healthcare as well, which we're also going to talk about a little bit more in a second. Now, just so you know, this reincarnation project that I've just gone through is just a summary. And I'm going to attach a whole PDF on this project into Classroom. So if you want to download it and read it in your own time, then you can. There's 20 odd pages or something, but it goes into each phase in detail and you can take your time and go through it. So that's the title of it. That's the contents page. I'm not going to go through that now. It's just to show you it's got all the contents of the project in it. And it goes through each project phase by phase and lists all the different projects within it, and it actually explains all the different projects as well. Also gives you a nice flow diagram to show you what project leads to what project. Okay, but that's a PDF that's going to be in Classroom that you can go and read. Okay, so now let's talk about the impact on healthcare. Possible impacts on healthcare. So of course there's going to be a revolution in human anatomy, because so far science only recognizes the material body and is only just starting to move into quantum biology, or that's what they're calling it, quantum biology. But that's going to advance, and at some point all the different parts of the human anatomy are going to be discovered. The lower mind, the higher mind, the energy body. So that's a revolution in human anatomy, a completely different set of anatomy in a different type of energy. A revolution in genetics, of course. If you look at the field of genetics now, just imagine it just expanding completely into not only lower mind genetics, but also higher mind genetics, where in the higher mind there is a storehouse of all the genetic information that has come from previous incarnations. But that's way in the future. The higher mind genetics is quite way in the future, just because of the high level of frequency and how difficult it's going to be to actually detect that. But that will come at some point. Disease diagnosis, treatment, and prevention. So we're going to start to understand a lot more about where these things come from. There's a whole, at the moment, there is a line of ancestry that people think genetics come from. Well, when we realize that there is a whole different line of past incarnations, that's a whole other line of ancestry with genetic information that impacts the current incarnation, that's going to revolutionize disease diagnosis, for example, and also the treatment and the prevention. Psychology, psychiatry, mental health. Now this is looking at the emotion side of things, karma, emotion, an understanding of karma in the energy body, past life karmas, and how they impact the psychology and the mental health of the current incarnation. Because that is all completely blind to these fields of study currently. So that is going to be a huge area of growth. And most importantly, you could say preventative healthcare, because this will open society's eyes to spiritual evolution and karma, and how to prevent karma from being produced. If we can understand the mechanisms in science, then people can be taught how to stop producing karma or negative karma. So this is going back to preventative healthcare, really. Spiritual practice, self-healing. All of this will become much, much bigger in healthcare because of the mechanisms that are understood and what is causing people's current problems in a current incarnation related to their karma. So these are some of the things that are possible in the future. Now, this is just sort of mind mapping, okay? So don't take this too far or anything, but this is just possibilities that could happen once all of these things have been detected. So, for example, starting on the right there, I'll run through these quickly because they're just little ideas to give you an idea of how these things could be integrated into science. And by the way, the Deep Peace Project is a company that we're going to start, which will hold the licenses to any technology that comes out of the project, which we can then license to different organizations. And this will actually help us pay for the salaries of the network healers themselves. So just starting on the right there, the energy body. We can start mapping the energy body. And if you think about medical imaging that exists already, like MRI, X-rays, that type of thing, well, we could, or there could be a system developed for imaging the energy body. That is inevitable at some point, isn't it? And moving down and to the left, incarnation tracing. So perhaps we can actually start from a certain point onwards, start the possibility of tracing people's incarnations so that they start having a medical history. This is kind of going back to what you guys were saying, but it would have to start at a certain point, really. You wouldn't be able to really go just have the history already. It would be from then on, wouldn't it? You'd start tracing your incarnations from then on. And then people would have start building a medical history. And, hundreds of years down the line, then there'll be a nice long medical history that people could have, including their past incarnations, genetics. Moving along to the left, life support systems. This is just an idea about the magnetic flux of the meridian system, for example. So at the moment, life support systems include things like oxygen support, for example, all the absolute necessities of keeping somebody alive in a hospital setting, for example. Well, there is something that's missing from there, isn't it? And that is subtle energy that's coming from the meridian system, because part of life, part of the Krebs cycle in every cell is needing oxygen, needing a fuel supply, but also subtle energy, which is not yet known to science. So maybe there's something in life support systems that will change. Right, I'll jump up to KPS mapping. Look, KPS mapping is mapping the personality spectrum. Karmic personality spectrum, that's KPS. So the karmic personality spectrum is the karma on the outside layers of people's energy body. And understanding that is going to have a massive impact on psychology and mental health and all that, because it is the past incarnations, personalities almost, which is laid in that karmic personality spectrum. So imaging specifically to that is going to be very useful to healthcare. And then past life genetics, well, that's somewhere in the future of understanding how the higher mind keeps a complete storehouse of genetic information from all its past incarnations. And understanding that is obviously going to have a whole new field of study or repercussions. And then awareness fields mapping. I'm not sure what the application could be here exactly, but this is when you, at some point, you detect the filter in the higher mind and you start to map the different awareness fields in the filter, and maybe there's a level of control that is possible, which is starting to control how people are feeling in the awareness filter. That's way, way, way into the future. Okay, that's it. So that's just a few various ideas of how healthcare and science and technology in healthcare could change with the understanding of reincarnation. So that's about it for healthcare. So let's talk about application in network healers, because that's what we're doing at the moment. And, a lot of the stuff we've talked about so far is just in the future, really. So how do we use it in network healers? Well, we use it currently in network healers. There's lots of examples of how we use it in network healers. And if you look at the founding principles there on the petals of this daffodil, you can see that there's one called karma emotions. So that's, in brackets, emotional memory and reincarnation applied to health. That's one of the founding principles of network healers. So karma, I'm not going to talk about too much in this lesson, because next week is the lesson on karma, the third lesson on karma, and we'll talk about the applications of karma next week. But reincarnation, where can we use the knowledge of reincarnation in network healers, or where do we use it currently? Well, here's a little flow diagram just to show what we currently do, but this is going to be informed by research, and as our knowledge grows, it's going to change. And this is just a sort of an illustration of how we use it. So if you start at the top, and we first start with an assessment of a development level of that person, because you need to know roughly where they are in their spiritual evolution to know what sort of things they need and how you can best help them. You know, if you introduce someone to a school or a university, you first need to know what level they're at, so what class to put them in, for example. So moving down to the next, the one very important question is there a life plan in place? Does that soul have a life plan for that incarnation? So if we go to no, go to the left and go to no, then there's some more questions to ask. Does this person have a sleeping higher mind or a woken up higher mind? And if it's a sleeping higher mind, is that soul ready to wake up or not? Got to ask these questions. And that might influence as to what sort of services that we give. For example, in this case scenario, we can give healing, energy healing. We can teach self-healing. We can help burn their karma away. But if we go to yes, is there a life plan in place? And we go over to the right-hand side to yes, there's all sorts of other things to consider as well. For example, soul agreements and lesson learning. We have to consider these things. You know, lots of people come through our healing program and they might be having problems with family members or problems with people, social problems with people in their life or something like that. So we have to consider, is there a soul agreement going on? You know, and these problems is what causes people blockages in their chakras, for example. But it's coming from karma that's burning. Emotional reactions causes blockages. So, you know, one of the things that we want to do is to try and help people remove their blockages, for example. But we've got to understand it more. Is there a soul agreement in place? Are they going through a lesson learning process in their Kundalini growth, for example? And the next questions we want to ask is it part of their plan, their life plan, to allow us to burn their karma? Is it part of their life plan to accept energy healing? This is a question we have to constantly ask, because sometimes energy healing doesn't work. There's lots of reasons why it doesn't work sometimes, and this is a big reason. The higher mind sometimes says no. No, the higher mind doesn't want energy healing because it's part of their life plan. They need to go through whatever experience they need to go through, or they need to burn their karma, in whatever way they need to, i.e., in emotional reactions. So, for example, if it's a no, then what can we do? Well, we can teach them self-healing, for sure. And that might be the reason. Their higher mind might say, no energy healing. It wants self-healing. It wants that person to do it themselves. And perhaps emotional lesson learning as well in that case. If it's a yes, is it part of their plan to accept energy healing? If it's a yes, then of course we can give energy healing. Excellent. We can also teach self-healing. And if you notice, self-healing is in all of them, actually. So that there isn't any situation really where you can't teach self-healing. Unless, of course, that person's not interested. That's possible. And in that case, if it's a yes, we can also help burn their karma away as well, so they don't have to feel those emotional reactions. And emotional lesson learning as well, because they're going through the journey of spiritual evolution. Now, I haven't put Kundalini awakening and self-realization on this. There's not really room. But that's another case scenario as well, because it completely changes if somebody's having a Kundalini awakening and self-realization. It's different again as to what, how you approach the situation. Basically, what we generally do, so this is kind of just setting it out in an educational way, but what we generally do is we try and send energy healing anyway. It's just that you know that if you know already that then they might not accept it, you're almost certain it might not work, basically. But you do tend to send it anyway, just in case, because you can never be sure. The subject of the next slide. So basically, a couple of questions that you could ask is, how do we know the development level? And also, how do we know if there is a life plan? And really, that's part of what you were just saying there. If you know if someone's going to live or not, then that's part of the life plan. And sometimes it isn't clear, of course. But we need to use our intuition as much as we can for this. So intuition is key to network healers. This is how this is what we use as part of that assessment process, which is why there's 2 lessons on intuition in the fast track. And this is why the exercises are so important to develop intuition. Okay, another application is teaching reincarnation. So teaching reincarnation is so important. And once we have the evidence of reincarnation, then everyone will start teaching it. And that's great. That's how it's going to grow in society. But the understanding of reincarnation is going to lead eventually to a reduction of a fear of death, and eventually a reduction of a fear of loss, a fear of losing people. And can you imagine in the future, some point where the astral planes, the astral dimensions actually become visible to the material plane, and people are able to talk to those in between incarnations freely in some way, whether it's through internal mechanisms or if it becomes part of technology, who knows? But there'll be no more fear of death and no more fear of loss, which is a huge problem in our society, isn't it? Fear of death drives so much in our society, and all that will change eventually. And teaching spiritual evolution, which is part of reincarnation, will help give more meaning and purpose. Because that's what happens with materialism. With people who think that the material body is who they are, it then makes it part of their identity. They're attached to that material body. Therefore, the loss of that material body is everything, and there is no more meaning and purpose really when we're in materialism. So understanding that the soul carries on and there is a purpose to the soul, to reincarnation, there is a goal of life, self-realization. Understanding spiritual evolution will generate meaning and purpose. And lastly, a big application of reincarnation and the evidence for reincarnation lies in our upcoming Ayashanta department. So if you remember, Aya Healing has got 3 departments in it. There's network healers, there's Aya Care, and there's Ayashanta. And Ayashanta is the end of life care department. And a mainstream knowledge of reincarnation is going to revolutionize end of life care, really. Knowing what really happens. Being able to prepare people for what's coming. Making the end of life a happy thing rather than a sad thing. Getting people to start a life introspective self-inquiry journey. Down there on the bottom right there. Life introspective self-inquiry. This is what happens after somebody's finished their incarnation. Currently. They go through a life review. They have to look over their life. It's an emotional time. Wouldn't it be great if we could start that before somebody passes away? Because quite often, once you've passed away, for some people, it's a bit too late. They're looking for forgiveness. They're looking for reconciliation with people. And if they've already passed on, sometimes it's very difficult to do that, obviously. So imagine doing that before you go. Finding acceptance and closure with all your family members, things like that. Doing that before you go would be very useful. But a knowledge of reincarnation is important for that. Yeah, this stuff is thousands of years old. This is ancient knowledge. I mean, we're rebranding it for a modern age, of course, but the concepts are these have been known about for a long time, and they've grown gradually in society or various cultures, but it's still the population growth of the planet has grown too fast for these concepts. And it's all part of the plan. It's part of the global awakening plan. So it starts off small and then grows and grows and grows. And then suddenly the global awakening happening and it explodes. And that's where these concepts become mainstream instead of just ancient wisdom or ancient knowledge. All right, anything else? Yeah, the more these things appear, the better. And it is getting quite popular now, and Kundalini itself now is becoming mainstream, and self-realization is following it. But yeah, these things are becoming popular. I reckon as we see the dip in everything just before the global awakening, the next 10 years are going to be a struggle for the planet. But then after that, there'll be a flowering of self-realization. So I reckon that over the next 10 years, as we see this dip happening, I think at the same time, self-realization is going to grow massively and massively, because people are going to look for it. They're going to want it because they're going to see what's going on in the world and look for the antidote. And that's the planet awakening from its suffering. So then self-realization in 10 years or so will be at the point of exploding. And then when we get all the crap behind us, then that's what really kicks off the golden age of self-realization. And we're into the next planetary cycle there. All right then. Well, I guess we better call it a day, shall we? Lovely. See you guys next week. Have a good week.